let's talk about parasite management in chickens. We're going to talk about exactly what your options are and how to deworm your flock. And if you just want to know that information, jump on ahead to that chapter. But first we're going to talk about things you can do to prevent parasites and also the factors that influence whether your flock is likely to have issues with parasites and what the sort of load of parasites are that you might be dealing with. There are things that you can do to help keep the parasite load of your flock low. Now, chickens are always going to have some parasites. It's essentially impossible to prevent it entirely, but you can use some management practices to keep that load low for your flock, and that will allow you to not have to use a chemical dewormer as often as you might otherwise have to. So things to help keep your load low is really about your chicken's health. First and foremost, if you keep your chickens really healthy, that they've got a good diet, they're getting exercise and fresh food, and that their coop has got lots of ventilation and you're making sure it stays relatively clean, these are all things that can help prevent parasites from becoming a big issue in your flock. Healthy chickens are better able to resist the effects that parasites have on their system. So keeping your chickens healthy is your best first defense against parasites. Now, chickens have both internal and external parasites. So internally, they have a whole range of different worms that can colonize them and live in their guts or in their throats. It's pretty gross, but they're going to have a few. There's not much you can do about that. And they also have external parasites. So that's things like lice and mites. Now, mites can be a real issue in chickens. It's like a constant battle, particularly against a mite that we call the red mite. And that mite doesn't actually live on your chickens all the time. It lives in the coop or in the nesting boxes or in the perches of your chicken coop. So it is a bit of a tricky little one to take care of. But you can do things to prevent the populations of that red mite from building up in your coop, and that is things like keeping the bedding clean and moving the bedding out of your nest boxes regularly. But those mites like to live in the cracks and crevices of your coop. But a few things I've found really helpful in keeping those numbers low are lime washing my coop. So that is with actual hydrated lime, and lime washing it like the olden days has been really effective in keeping mites low in my chicken coop. And that works by making the environment of the walls and the crevices of your coop not very inviting for mites to set up shop in there. So that is, I would highly recommend doing that if you can. Other things are using things like diatomaceous earth or a mite powder as a preventative in nest boxes and things like that. Just puff it into the corners and crevices. And some essential oils can be useful for preventing and repelling insects from wanting to be in your chicken coop. Now, I'm not going to go into specific essential oils here, but you can jump on and research that for yourself. But I would say that essential oils they're like the drugs of the plant world. They're highly concentrated. They can be very dangerous. So if you're looking at using essential oils for prevention, which is a good idea, make sure you've done your research and you're using them safely. The environment where you live, so where you live in the world, will influence how much of a problem parasites are going to be for you. So for me, I live in a really temperate place. It's quite humid, it doesn't get really, really cold, and it doesn't get really, really hot. And that means that I have parasite pressures all year round. There isn't a point where that life cycle gets broken for me, so I have to be really on it and keeping an eye on my flock, and I do have to use chemical dewormers at least twice a year to keep on top of things. Now, if you live somewhere where there are very cold winters, that helps to break parasite life cycles, so you will roll into springtime with essentially not too much of a burden in your environment. So that can help you not have to deworm your flock as often. And also if you live in a desert environment, a very dry environment where the humidity is very low, that will also break parasite cycles, especially in your hot season. So that will also put you in a better place than me here, where the parasites are just breeding at will all the time. When it comes to chickens, there's not really anything you can do to completely prevent them from getting parasites, unless they lived inside in a shed like a commercial chicken operation where they have no contact with their environment at all. But I'm going to assume that most people who have chickens in their backyard are not keeping chickens like that. So chickens pick up parasites from things that they eat. They pick it up from insects. Wild birds can drop their droppings, or those red mites can come off of wild birds. So it's really not possible to say, oh, if I just do this thing and that thing, my chickens will never pick up a parasite. For chickens, it's not really that possible to achieve that. So keep that in mind. You're not going for a zero parasite load here. You're just going for a managed load that allows your flock to stay healthy with the parasites that they're going to have to live with. So how are you going to deworm your flock if they need it? Well, first think about if they need it. Now that's a pretty tricky thing to know, but for me, I just watch how my flock is behaving. I watch how their poop looks, and if they start to get sort of fractious and more unhappy, scrapping with each other more, and if their poop is starting to get sort of runny for no reason that I can determine, then I know that I need to worm my flock. And for me, that's usually 3 to 4 times a year, but if you live somewhere else, that might be significantly less than that. So let's talk about the options you have for worming. Chickens don't have a lot of dewormers that are sort of officially for them, and that is because there's not a lot of reason to research dewormers for chickens, because the commercial chicken industry doesn't have parasite issues because their chickens live in big sheds that have no contact with the environment. So that being said, you do have some options. My favorite option is a dewormer called flubenol. And that is a very safe dewormer that comes as a powder. And you just mix this powder into your flock's food for 7 days. So what I do is I read the instructions, and it is for how much feed you're going to feed for the week is how much powder you're going to take out. So from my flock, they're going to eat about 20 kilos of feed for the week. So I take out 10 grams of flubenol. And what I do there is I just have it separately, and each day I take a little portion and mix it in with their feed and feed it out. So they can't notice it in there. It's really easy. The whole flock gets wormed at once, but it is something you need to do every day for 7 days, and that is the treatment protocol. This is something that is used to deworm fish in aquariums as well. So if you can't track it down for chickens, or you're struggling to find a farm store that has it, you can use it from a pet store or something that might be selling it for aquarium fish. So that's just a little tip in terms of tracking it down, because this is my preference. It's the easiest way to go about worming your flock, but this only does internal parasites, so it's not going to do anything about lice or mites in your flock. Another option is something called levamisole, and in New Zealand it's sold under the brand Deworm. Now this is a liquid, and that makes it a little trickier to feed out, and it is just a 1-day treatment. Now this is done on flock weight. So how I do that myself is I figure out what an average weight per chicken is in my flock. For me, I've decided that's 3.5 kilos, and then I multiply that by how many birds are in my flock, and then I do the math on how that works for dosing, and then I take out with a syringe the precise dose for the total flock weight. Now, not every single one of my chickens is precisely 3.5 kilograms, but I've got smaller ones, I've got bigger ones, so it's going to average out, and I generally go slightly over the dose recommendation because there are safety margins, and you don't want to deworm your flock. You really want to make sure that they're getting the dose that they need. Now this is, according to the instructions, supposed to go in the water for your flock for their 1-day treatment. Now that does not work for my flock at all. They just won't drink for a day if I do that. So what I do is I take out my measured dose, I put it into a liquid like fruit juice or milk or a beaten up egg, and then I distribute that into a food that I know they really, really like canned fish or raw ground beef, something like that, and then they will come and they will gobble it up without noticing that it's in there. But this does not taste very good, so you have to disguise it, and I have decided that the flubenol is a much easier option, although that is the 7-day treatment versus a 1-day treatment with the levamisole. So options, things to keep in mind. Both of these dewormers are safe and official for use in chickens, but neither of them will do anything for external parasites. These are internal parasite dewormers only. The final dewormer that I have used in my flock is ivermectin. It could also be moxidectin. Now, this is off-label for poultry, but it is very commonly used. I get this from my local veterinarian. They're totally happy with giving it to me for use in my chicken flock, and it has instructions for using it in a chicken flock as well. So I'm perfectly happy using this, even though it is officially off-label for use in poultry. Now this one you apply to each individual chicken and you apply it externally. So the instructions I have are to put 1 or 2 drops onto the comb of the chicken, and then that's it, it's done. It's sort of like when you put a flea treatment on your cat or dog. It's a similar sort of thing. Now this one's really good because it does both internal and external parasites. So it's going to deal with mites and lice, and it's going to deal with worms inside your chicken. However, you do have to apply it to each individual chicken. So if you have a lot of chickens, that could be quite the undertaking for getting every single one of them treated. Now, I tend to use this when I have a reason to be handling a chicken, and usually I use it as a broody hen treatment because that hen's going to be sitting there for quite a long time, very vulnerable to mites and lice. And she's not taking care of herself very well, so her health is going to decline while she's sitting on eggs. So I just have a standard policy that whenever I've got a hen that's going to sit on eggs, I give them a couple of drops of the ivermectin just to make sure they're good for that time period. But yeah, that one, really good, really effective, but individual chicken treatment, so make sure you've got a lot of time on your hands if you're going to go ahead and use this one. Now this one is supposed to be used twice, so 7 to 10 days after your first application, you're supposed to do a second application. And the idea there is that it breaks the life cycle of the parasites, particularly the external ones. So if they were in an egg when you did the first treatment, they will have hatched out and be wiped out in the second treatment. So from that perspective, it's great if you have a reason to be handling your chicken, like they're broody or you're catching them for some reason. But from a whole flock perspective, having to catch every single chicken and treat them, and then 7 to 10 days later catch them all again and treat them, I don't find it super practical. So I don't use this one as frequently as I use the other options. Those are 3 options for treating your flock for parasites. There might be other options that you have available for you, but make sure that you have researched it thoroughly, because these are the only ones that I know that are officially sanctioned for use in poultry. Keep in mind that you cannot 100% prevent parasites in your flock, and in my opinion, while there are lots of things you can do to help prevent things, once you have an infestation or an infection or a load of parasites in your flock, you really do need to go to a chemical option to take care of it. You can use lots of different methods for keeping your flock healthy and holding the load down, but once you see that you need to treat, you need to go ahead and treat with a chemical. That is what the research tells us. That is what I do. You can do what feels right for you, but this gives you the information to go ahead and make sure that your flock is healthy and your parasite loads are low.